Kerwin's Game Store, the best place in gaming.
Hi, my name is Steven and this is Luke. We're here today at Kerwin's Game Store in Catskill, New York, down on Main Street, to show you how to play Sentinels of the Multiverse, the card game. This is the second edition, or as they call it, the Enhanced Edition, post-Kickstarter. Sentinels first appeared on my radar about 2 years ago, PAX East, when they were doing demonstrations. Last year, they came with the complete product and a couple of different expansions. It is not a deck building game. This is a cooperative superhero game where you and your friends play any one of a number of heroes, where each deck is a complete hero and everything they have. The deck never changes. Every time you play Bunker, Bunker's cards will be exactly the same. But don't let that fool you, because there are certain synergies hidden between how you can combine different heroes at the table, sometimes to make them more effective or just make the game a lot more fun. You also have a number of villains that you can acquire and environments in which you can fight them in. The game goes as tongue twisting tied today. The game goes as thus. You have a villain who always goes first. And the villain has 2 cards to start. He has the cards representing himself, which is 2-sided. And up here you see the number of hit points that he has. And the game comes with a number of tokens that you can use to help represent them. He also comes with a setup card. The setup card tells you how to set up for that villain's game. Every villain works differently. And in addition to playing differently, sometimes they can have different goals aside from beating your heroes to a bloody pulp. Grand Warlord Vos is one of them. If at the start of his turn he has 10 or more minions in play, the planet is overrun by the Thrathian army and the game is over. There are certain conditions where a villain will flip, and then how he plays changes. You're also going to see this little purple symbol, which is an H inside of a circle. That represents the number of players at the beginning of the game, and this is how the game attempts to balance itself for larger groups. You can play with anywhere from 2 to 5, but you want to have at least 3 for a really well-rounded game. Otherwise, some of the villains tend to be a little too hard. If for some reason you find a villain too easy, you can also add in the advanced text at the bottom of either side to make the game more difficult. This is not considered balanced plays by the designer, but sometimes can add things, be a little bit more interesting. The heroes look like the beginning of comic book covers. The issue number is the number of hit points that you start with, and every hero has a power that will come into play later. Also, a hero has a symbol that represents them. And when a villain has the same symbol, those 2 characters are considered nemesises, and whenever damage is dealt, they deal an extra point of damage to each other. If for some reason a hero is knocked out by running out of hit points, you have one of 3 actions that you could take on your turn in order to continue to assist your other players, even though all your other cards are removed from the game. Now, one of the things that I really enjoy about Sentinels, and you're going to see this when you take a look at it, is that there's all kinds of scenes and quotes on the bottom that tell a story. And it turns out the designers have this entire storyline for all the characters in the Sentinels of the Multiverse from beginning to end that they're going to tell through the course of their expansions. And when they're done telling the story, they're going to stop publishing the game. Now, things that you need to know about the hero cards. When you go and play cards, pretty much all the magic is right here with the keywords. Keywords tell you certain things about the cards that are going to be in play. Normally, a card is a one-shot, which means that you play it, you resolve its text, and then you put it into the discard pile. But any other card, if it says equipment or ongoing, and there's some other keywords too, but pretty much anything that's not a one-shot will stay in play. If the card has limited, that means that you may only have 1 copy of that card in play at a time. A lot of cards are going to be referred to by their keywords. So if you're playing, let's say, a character that cannibalizes equipment in order to build robots, they'd be able to affect any card that says equipment on it. But some other cards may have a device keyword instead. It means the same thing, but in terms of using a keyword for an action, they're not the same card. Every hero and every villain plays differently, and it's worth sitting down and taking time to go through the deck to get an idea how that particular person plays. Haka, whom Luke is playing, is your basic strong guy archetype. He likes wiping up minions by the score, which is why we picked him to play against Warlord Vos. Tempest is kind of like your otherworldly alien with superpowers, not unlike Superman, but with a slightly different story. The villain always goes first, followed by each hero in turn. And then also, there will be the environment. This is something that can alter gameplay for both the villain and for the heroes, and generally is not good for either of them. In this case, we chose to have our fight in the Megalopolis, so it's pretty much Superman's Metropolis. We're going to be fighting the invading army of aliens in the big city. The villain always goes first. We're going to set up the game, and it says at the start of the game we put Grand Lord Vos into play, conquering alien warlord side up. Really, this is just for looks. You never have to worry about flipping that card unless it has something different, as it occasionally does. Then it wants us to shuffle the deck, which we've done in advance, and reveal from the top until H minions are revealed. Again, the purple H is the number of players at the start, so I'm looking for 2 minions. There's my first one, and there's my second. These minions are put into play. The other cards are shuffled back into the villain deck. Let's take a look at our minions. Our minions can each take 3 hit points. And, as it turns out, they have certain resistances. The first minion is immune to fire damage, and it has an ability for the start of the end of the villain turn. The second one is immune to lightning, and has an ability for the end of the villain turn. We'll get to those abilities when the villain turn actually ends. I put these here for the moment. Now, first thing we do is we check for start of turn effects. At the start of the villain turn, if there are no minions in play, Grand Warlord Vos flips. We also check at the beginning of the turn to see if there are 10 or more minions, where he wins the game. And there's also a piece of text here that says that any damage dealt to Grand Warlord Vos is reduced by 2 for each minion in play. So we have to deal more than 4 points of damage in one shot to have any hope of damaging him, which makes it a good idea to take care of the minions first. With no start of turn effects, we move on to playing 1 card from the top of the villain deck. In this case, we reveal another minion, which has 3 hit points, and is immune to cold damage, which will come into play later. Now we look for end of turn effects. We know there's none here because we just reviewed the card. And we come over here to the Gene-bound Fire Swarm. At the end of the villain turn, this card deals the hero target with the highest hit points 2 fire damage. I have 26, and Haka has 34, so he takes 2 points of fire. At the end of the villain turn, the Gene-bound Shock Infantry will deal the hero with the highest hit points 3 lightning damage, which unfortunately is once again Haka. It's not unusual for heroes to take a real beating at the beginning of the game, but as they build up, they develop their own strategies for avoiding damage and start dishing out some of their own. The final minion does his turn, and at the end of the turn, he deals each hero 2 cold damage, so Tempest finally takes some himself. And now it's time for the first hero's turn. Each hero starts with 4 cards. On your turn, you may play a card, use a power, and then you may draw a card.
So in this case, Haka of Shielding, draw 2 or more cards. So I'm going to draw 2.
No, draw 2 cards.
Draw 2 cards, excuse me. Draw 2, and then discard 1 card or 1 or more cards. And then for every time I discard a card, I reduce my damage by 2.
The damage you take by 2.
Yes, sorry. So I'm actually going to discard 2 cards. And then I reduce my damage by 4.
So there are a number of useful status tokens that you can put down here. But because they're limited in number, I'm just going to stack some extra hit points on here to show just how much damage he can prevent the next time he's hit. And now Haka gets to use a power. Right now, the only power he has is the one printed on his character card.
And I'm going to be able to deal 1 target 2 melee damage. So I'm going to go and grab the Gene-bound Shock Infantry and power bomb him for 2 damage.
Alright. Now you get to draw a card at the end of your turn. If for some reason a player chooses not to play a card and not to use a power, he may draw 2 cards instead of 1, which is essentially skipping your turn to help rebuild your hand quickly. Now, Tempest Turn. Alright. Tempest is going to start with a ball of lightning. So he deals 1 target 4 lightning damage, and I'm going to take out the Frost Hound because he's dealing damage to both of us. And that'll go in the discard pile for the Warlord. And then I may destroy up to 2 ongoing cards. There are none in play that I want to affect, so that part of the text we'll ignore. And I will discard the card. Now I'll use Tempest power, which is a Squall. Tempest deals all non-hero targets 1 projectile damage. 1 to the Firesworn, 1 to...
Oh, it's projectile damage, my bad. I thought it was lightning damage. My apologies.
Which is fair because Tempest deals a lot of lightning damage.
Yes.
He does 1 to the Shock Infantry, which will also kill that. And he also does 1 to Warlord Vos. But he still has damage reduction too because he has 1 minion in play, so that has no effect. I draw a card, and it is now the environment's turn. The environment, just like a villain, will have beginning and end of turn effects, but since there are no cards in play, we move straight ahead to playing a card. In this case, we have a plummeting monorail, which is worth 10 hit points. At the start of the environment turn, this card deals 2 targets with the highest hit points 5 melee damage each. Now notice, this doesn't make a distinction between hero or villain. It can actually be very helpful for us by landing on the Warlord Vos. But because it's the 2 targets with the highest hit points, inevitably, it'll be taking one of us down a peg too. But we have at least 1 whole turn to get rid of the card before it starts dealing its damage, if we choose. But 10 points is going to be a lot for just 2 players, and we may have to suffer that for a round or 2. There are no end of turn effects, so we come back around to the Grand Warlord. He still has minions, so he doesn't flip. He does not have 10 minions, so he does not win. We move straight to playing a card, and we now have a guard in play for him. And that reduces damage to all villain targets by 1. And somewhere in here, we'll just put that there to remind us that it's in play. And for end of turn effects, the Firesworn deals 2 points of damage to the hero with the highest hit points. I still have 26. Oh, no, I have 24.
I've got 22.
Nope. Tempest takes the fire damage. He only reduces damage. He doesn't deal any of his own. So the villain turn is now done, and it's now Haka's turn again.
All right. So since I didn't take any damage, because this said reduce the next damage dealt to Haka by 2 for each card discarded, I actually still get to keep this. This gets to stay here until, well, I take damage. So that's a good thing, a very good thing. So now I'm going to play Haka of Restoration, which basically has me drawing 2 cards, once again. And as I draw the 2 cards, I have to discard 1 or more cards. So I'm going to look through. And I'm going to get rid of this one.
Haka's Spiritual Chants are a really great example of how each character plays differently. There's no other character in this game that has this mechanic where he has ways of drawing cards and then he powers up by discarding.
I'm getting rid of 2 cards, which heals me. by 2. So I'm going to take 2 hit points back, which in this case seems like a very good thing. So that gets discarded. Now, once again, I can deal 1 target, 2 melee damage. And being that, oh man, I'm not going to be able to get rid of anybody.
No, because we have
the -1.
So I would start beating on him, so it would be easier to take out their minions.
So I'm going to hope in this case, and you already heard one of the joys of this game is that you start talking with your superhero friends to figure out how you're best going to deal with what's in front of you.
Now I can actually take him out with 1 shot on my turn.
Okay. Well, here's what I was worried. I was hoping that you'd have like a chain thing, because I know Tempest has special abilities in his deck that actually allows him to chain damage throughout many different foes.
Unfortunately, I don't have any of those in my card right now, but I do have a card that will allow me to get rid of environment cards, so we can get rid of the monorail on my turn before taking any damage from it.
All right.
But that's up to us to decide which is going to be the higher priority.
So in this case, I'm going to deal 2 damage. They take -1 damage, so I only do 1 damage to the Gene-bound guard. I draw my card, and then I hand it over to Tempest.
All right. Yeah, okay. I don't want to hold this up, but yeah, I'm going to do the Lightning Slash, which is going to deal 1 target 5 lightning damage. I really didn't agree with Luke's decision to pound on the guard because I told him I could take it out, but that's okay. I'm going to respect it instead by taking out the Gene-bound Fire Swarm in its entirety so we don't take damage from him on the following round. Then I'm going to deal Squall, which will deal all non-hero targets 1 projectile damage. The villains are reduced by 1, but I'll still ping 1 off of the monorail. And I don't want to put these here because I don't want him to gain life. I'll draw a card for the end of my turn, and it is now Luke's turn.
No, it's the environment's turn.
Yes, the environment's turn. So we hit the start of the environment turn, and now we're going to... The plummeting monorail acts at the beginning. I'm going to deal cards with 2 targets with the highest hit points, 5 melee damage each. And actually, it doesn't exclude environment cards. But you and I have too much health. So yes. I have 22, and you have?
24.
This is going to work out very well. So, first, the Grand Warlord Vos would take 5. But it's -2 because he has 1 minion in play, and minus an additional 1 because the guard, he's only going to take 2 points of damage. Haka would take 5, except that his Haka of shielding earlier will absorb 4 of it, and he only loses 1. Alright, then we play a new environment card, which is Rooftop Combat. Increase all damage dealt by 1. Also, while this card is in play, environment cards cannot be played. And when hero targets deal non-hero cards 10 or more damage in a single round, destroy this card. So, if we deal a lot of damage in the course of a round, this will go away and then we'll get environment cards again. So, this is pretty much how play is going to continue. The villain goes, each hero will have a shot, we'll develop our decks and playing our own individual strategies and work together to take them down. There is a lot to keep track of between your own cards in play and what the villain brings in play, what the environment brings in play, but it's rarely overwhelming to the point where you don't have fun. And again, there's a tendency to roleplay. You have several different heroes here representing many different archetypes from DC and Marvel Comics. You have analogs for Captain America, The Flash, martial artist guy. You have their version of Thor is actually Ra, whom Luke plays with great gusto.
The sun god Ra.
And there's also a good mix of male and female characters here. And just because they're female doesn't mean they're badass. Expatriate is basically the Punisher. Yes, thank you for the correction. Expatriate is basically the Punisher with lots of guns. Villains are equally well represented.
Come on, you forgot about the winner there. Isn't Night Mist like Batman?
No,
The
no.
Wraith is like Batman.
You have the Wraith, which is kind of like Batman, but young, like the early Spider-Man, with a lot of quick quips, and that sense of humor comes through where Batman's all grimdark and grumble and my parents are dead. The villains are also equally well spread out and sometimes recognizable. Citizen Dawn, for example, is very much a Magneto-type character who attracts other superpowered beings to her cause and believes in the superiority of them over normal humans. But then you get stuff like the Organization, which is basically a crime family, and they're actually quite tough to beat. And then you get things like the pantheon of Egyptian gods, which are all villains and nemesises of Ra. You even have supernatural villains, such as Gloomreaver, who represents, let's say, Mephisto, or the Apostate, which is your basic falling angel. The environments are equally diverse. My favorite is probably Insula Primalis, which is basically dinosaurs and volcanoes, and you really can't go wrong there. The basic set comes with 6 villains, 4 heroes, and 4 environments. And it comes in this big box, which leaves plenty of room to add in the expansions. Right now I have 3 additional expansions, pretty much fills the box. With the next expansion, it'll be another big box like this. I don't know what the distribution of cards will be, but be sure it's going to leave room for even more fun later down the line. So Sentinels in the Multiverse, the basic box is $40 and the expansions are $20 each, and I think that that's a really good value for a game of this type. It is family friendly. If you let your kids watch superhero shows, this should be right up the alley, although keeping track of all the different things may be a little difficult for them. You may need to give them a hand. Plays 2 to 5 players. 2 players, you really have to choose your villain carefully because sometimes they're a little rough. The rulebook deserves a mention here, not only because it's got more comic book style art and lettering, but also because in the center it lists a number of heroes and villains that were released at the time that they did the 2nd edition, and it gives you the icons so you can see who the nemesises are, and it also gives you the relative complexity of the heroes and the difficulty of the villains, so you have a pretty good idea before you get into the game what sort of problems that you might run into, or at least how difficult it's going to be. And that, in a nutshell, is how you play Sentinels of the Multiverse.